everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be making these cozy crochet mittens worked up with a bulky weight yarn. They work up really quickly. They are also pretty easy to make and require no seaming, as we're going to be working them in the round. To make these mittens, I am using two different colors of weight 5 chunky yarn. I just have paint box yarn here. It's a basic acrylic yarn. This is a weight 5 yarn and the recommended hook size is 6. So I'm going to be using two different colors of this yarn to make these mittens. I'm also using two different hooks, a 5mm hook for the ribbing and a 6mm hook to make the mittens. We're also using the usual tools for this, scissors, darning needle, and I have some stitch markers here just to do the thumb portion of the mittens. So we're going to be working these mittens from the cuff up, so I'm going to start with my 5mm hook and my ribbon color. So I'm just going to start by making a slip knot. And then I'm going to chain 11 for the cuffs. Then I'm going to come into my second stitch here from the hook, the second chain from the hook, and I'm going to work a single crochet. Just like that, and I'm going to place one single crochet into each chain space until I get to the end of the row. Okay. At the end of the row here, we should have 10 single crochets. Now I'm just going to turn this over, and for the ribbing, I'm not going to chain one at the beginning of every end. I'm just going to start with a single crochet into the first stitch here. So we have this first stitch space. I'm just going to go through the back loop of this and place one single crochet. So under the back loop only, grab the yarn, place one single crochet. Again, into the back loop only. Here, grab the yarn, place one single crochet. Back loop only of the stitch, single crochet. And I'm going to repeat this till I get to the end of the row. Okay, when we get to the end here, we have this last stitch and this extra chain from the first row. This extra chain doesn't count as a stitch. It's just used in the first row to build up that yarn so that we have a way to make that first single crochet. So just into the back loop of that first stitch from the first row is what we're working our final single crochet into. Okay, so our second row, once again, has 10 single crochet. I'm going to turn my work again, and we're going to repeat this row the exact same way. One single crochet into this first stitch without chaining one, and one single crochet into each stitch in this row through the back loop only. And then we have our final stitch here. Hopefully you can see it. You want to grab just, oops, can be a little tricky. Grab just the back loop of that last stitch and make a single crochet into that. So we're just repeating this for the entire cuff, and the nice thing about this is that you can make these mittens to fit whatever size hand you like. So you're just going to continue making this cuff until it is long enough to sit comfortably around your wrist without being too loose or too tight. So I've come to the end of my ribbing and I ended up with 27 rows of single crochet through the back loop only. And this just fits comfortably around my wrist in a way that I know it's going to be tight enough to be a cuff, but also it's going to stretch a little bit. So I want to keep all those things in mind when I'm making this, but 27 rows fits perfectly for me for these mittens that I'm making. So once you have the number of rows that you're happy with, we're going to go ahead and join this together. So I'm just going to fold these edges together, and we're going to just slip stitch these pieces together. So to do this, we're just going to sandwich these together. I'm going to work once again through the back loop only of the stitches of the row that we're on. The foundation row that I did here doesn't have two different sets of loops, so we're just going to work underneath the loop of each stitch. So to get started, I'm just going to go into this stitch that I'm in, insert my hook through the back loop only, find the first stitch here on the foundation row, place my hook underneath, grab the yarn, and come through the back loop, or the back stitch there, the stitch, and through the stitch that was on our hook initially. Then we're going to go through the back loop only of the next stitch, find the second stitch in our foundation chain, go underneath that loop, grab the yarn, and pull through both. Once again, back loop only of the next stitch here, underneath the next stitch on our foundation row, grab our yarn, pull through both. Underneath the back loop only, through the fourth stitch in this loop here, pull through both. And I'm just going to repeat this until we get to the end of the row. Making sure that the stitches line up. It helps a lot to count what stitch you're on in the foundation row especially, so that everything matches up. But remember to work through those back loops only for this portion. And then our final stitch, find that back loop and that first stitch in the last row. Complete our slip stitch, and that's our final slip stitch. So we're going to pull through one more time to fasten off our yarn here and just cut our tail there. Pulling this to fasten off, and that is our completed cuff. So with this cuff, because now we have a little bit of a hump from that slip stitch, what I like to do is turn this inside out so that we have a nice clean seam on the outside, and this will be the outside of our glove. So that's what we're going to work with for the cuff. So now we're going to get started on the next portion of the mitten. So I've just switched hooks here to my 6mm hook. I'm going to grab my yarn. I'm going to make a slip knot to start, keeping that on my hook. I'm going to find where we have the seam of the mitten here, and I'm just going to insert my hook to the left side of that seam, come through with a slip stitch to secure that, and then I'm going to chain 2. So we're going to be working half double crochets for the rest of the mitten. So I'm going to chain 2 at the beginning of every row, which does not count as a stitch. So into that same space, I'm going to place 1 half double crochet. And I'm going to go around and place 1 half double crochet into the side of each single crochet row all the way around. So I'm going to work these until I get back to the beginning over here. So I'm back at the beginning here, and I have 1 space left along the seam. So I'm going to place 1 final half double crochet in there. Because we are working this pattern in the round, the way that the stitch works, we want to have an even number of stitches in our first round when we finish. So if you need to add an extra stitch here to get an even number, then go ahead and do that. But I ended up with an even number, so I'm just going to close this off by slip stitching into the top of the chain 2 here. Let's just insert my hook and slip stitch. So we are going to turn this for every row. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over, chain 2, which does not count as a stitch, and then I'm going to come into the next space here. So not of this first stitch, but this stitch here, working through the back loop only. So we're going to take the back loop and do a half double crochet. Then into the next stitch, we're going to work through the front loop only. So I'm going to yarn over. This is our next stitch here. We have our V. We're working through this loop here on this side. So I'm going to yarn over, come up through the front loop only, and complete a half double crochet. Then in the next stitch, we're going to yarn over, half double crochet through this back loop only. Next stitch is front loop only, so yarn over, come through this front loop only here. Grab the yarn, complete our half double crochet. So we're just going to continue altering between back loop only half double crochet and front loop only half double crochet, which is going to give us that textured look, which is going to give us that textured pattern. So once more, do the back loop only, and then the next one is going to be through the front loop only. This guy in the front, we want to come underneath it through the center of the stitch and complete our half double crochets. So I'm going to finish this round and I'll come back when it's done. Now at the end of each row we should have our last stitch as a front loop only half double crochet. We just need it to start with the opposite stitch that the beginning of the row started with. So we started with a back loop only, we want to always end with a front loop only. So now that I'm at the end here, I'm going to find the top of that chain 2 and just slip stitch these sides together like so, and then turn and start the second row. So for the second row we're going to work it exactly the same as the first row. Chain 2, yarn over, skip this, so we have our chain 2 here, and then we have this little stitch here. We're actually working into this stitch with a back loop only half double crochet, and then a front loop only half double crochet, back loop only, and front loop only, repeating the same process as the first row for this row as well. And this is how the majority of the mitten is worked up. So we're going to go ahead and finish this row and then work 2 more rows for a total of 5 rows worked in the round, and then we'll start shaping for our thumb. Okay, so I just finished crocheting the 5th row as normal, and the 6th row is the one I've just finished here. So we're going to leave this open without attaching, and then we're just going to turn our work for this next row. Chain 2, yarn over, come into the back loop only of this first stitch where our chain 2 is coming out of. And then front loop only crochet, back loop only half double crochet, and repeat this row as normal until we get to the end. And then we are going to do 1 more row exactly the same without attaching. So at this point, after these 3 rows, this is what we have. And the great thing about making these mittens to your size is that you can just try them on and see if they fit comfortably. So I have 3 open rows here. I'm just going to pull this around my thumb to see if that's a comfortable fit. For me, I find that 3 rows to be pretty comfortable because it is going to stretch a little bit, and also when we start the next row above this, we will have, I think I have plenty of space working it like this. So I'm happy with that, but if you guys want to add more rows or take less rows away if you're making a child size or something like that, go ahead and do so. But for me, this is a good size, so I'm going to stop my open spaces here. And to do that, I'm just going to slip stitch the top of this here into the top of that chain 2. So we've created a closed thumb hole space now, and now we can just turn our work. Chain 2, and since we're back to working in the round, we're going to skip this first stitch base here and work into this one here with our back loop only half double crochet, and then front loop only half double crochet, and work our stitch pattern as normal until we get to the end of the row. You can check that your stitch pattern is working correctly because you should have all of the front post because you can see the lines of dips and raised stitches that you get from working in the back and the front. So this is pretty simple. From here on out, we are just going to work the same round pattern until we get the height of mitten that we like. Here's the mitten that I've already finished. It has a total of 20 rows from the very first row to the top row. So we can go ahead now and complete our mitten until it is as long as we want, and then we're going to fasten off the top and finish the thumb portion after. So reach the end of my 20 rows here. This is what the glove looks like. You can test to see if it's going to fit. You just want it to come just above your fingertips here. And then when we have that, we can fasten off. So I'm going to clip my yarn, leaving a good sized tail. And then I'm going to slip stitch and cast off, or fasten off, sorry. Slip stitch and fasten off. So we're going to use this extra long tail to close the top of the glove. So I'm going to thread my yarn needle, and we're going to close this by just weaving in and out of these stitches. So we're looking at the top of the stitches. I'm going to come underneath the first one, and then I'm going to go over the second one, under the third one, over, come out the next one, just working in and out of them, just so that I can catch every stitch to draw this top portion closed. Occasionally pull my yarn through, and then just keep doing this all the way around. Just weaving up and down through the stitches. Okay, once I've made it back to the beginning, to make sure, I like to grab the first stitch again, and then we can just pull this very tightly to cinch the top. Make sure that it closes all the way. It'll look like that. And then we can just take our yarn and come back through a couple stitches and across to secure the tails. So now moving on to the thumb portion of this. What I like to do for these mittens is make the upper part of the thumb a little bit longer, and then this just slightly shorter, just so that it works out to be a good shape. So I'm going to use my stitch markers to mark my stitches here. So I'm going to estimate where halfway through the thumb hole is. So I'm going to say here and here. So the bottom half of my stitches here are going to start with single crochet, and then we will work our regular half double crochets across the top of this. So to keep this even though, make sure you do the same number of stitches on each mitten. For the first one I've completed, I've done 12 stitches around the hole, 6 on the bottom and 6 on top. So I'm going to make sure that I end up with 6 single crochets across the bottom. So I'm going to take my yarn and we're going to join it the same way that we did before. Start with a slip knot, and I'm going to go into this first hole where I have my stitch marker. Place my yarn and secure it with a slip stitch. And to work my single crochets, I'm not going to chain one, I'm just going to start the single crochet into this space. So I'm going to work one single crochet into that space. And if you're ending up getting a hole like this, feel free to grab the portion of yarn that's a little bit lower when you make your single crochet to kind of help avoid that hole, like so. And I'm going to work 6 single crochets around here, just spacing them out evenly. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then into my last stitch marker I'll place the 6th single crochet. So I have 6 single crochets here along the bottom, and now for the top portion of this mitten hole I'm just going to go with 6 half double crochets, spaced out evenly as well. Again, to avoid this hole, I'm going to go just below that piece of yarn there. And the 6th one here. And when I get back to the beginning of my row, I'm just going to slip stitch underneath that first single crochet. So find the first single crochet there and slip stitch underneath that. For the thumb portion now, we're going to work it the exact same way we worked the rest of the mitten. So I'm just going to turn. It is a little bit more difficult to see just because it's such a small space, but it works exactly the same. So I'm going to chain 2, skip that first little stitch, work back loop only, half double crochet, yarn over, front loop only, half double crochet, back loop only, half double crochet, and our last stitch should be a front loop only, half double crochet, so that we can maintain the same textured pattern. Okay, and at the end of every row we're going to slip stitch. Okay, so we are going to repeat these rows until our thumb portion is long enough, and we are going to fasten off at the end and tie it the same way that we did the top. So I ended up working a total of 7 rows for the thumb portion, and after I've fastened off, I'm again just going to take my darning needle with the tail from fastening off and close up the thumb the same way that we closed the top of the mitten earlier. For the thumb, because it's much smaller, I do like to go back and forth a little bit just to make sure it's pulled nice and tight. Perfect. And then you can just weave in the tails and the gloves are finished. And that finishes up these mittens. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. If there's anything else you'd like to see me make, feel free to let me know in the comments below. And also if you like this, feel free to subscribe and I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye!